Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Bienvenidos. Welcome. I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. This is New Mexico History in 10 Minutes. Crypto Jews in New Mexico? How did this phenomenon happen? It starts in New Mexico many, many years ago. How did this happen? How did Hispano New Mexicans who are thoroughly Catholic start to manifest and show Jewish consciousness? Well, it starts around 1981 when my good friend Dr. Stan Hordes became state historian. I was just a young lad graduating from high school back then. But he was state historian for about 4 years, and during that time, some Hispanos started going to his office in Santa Fe and saying, I think we have a Jewish background. Our tío, when he passed away, he was facing the wall when he died. There are certain unique traditions that certain families would do on Friday evenings, the lighting of candles, certain dietary rules that were followed, no pork, all kinds of interesting ideas that kind of went against the grain of what a lot of Hispano Nuevo Mexicanos were doing and how they were living. So Dr. Horty started to investigate this and researching and digging in deeper, and finally started to look at not just family customs and traditions, but ultimately looking at genealogy and family histories. Ultimately, he hired many people, Gerald Gonzalez, um, Richard Salazar, former archivist of New Mexico, and me. I was hired to help Stan do genealogies and try to dig in and find out what was going on with these people who were claiming to have Jewish beliefs, Jewish traditions, and Jewish background. Well, how does this happen? How do we get to this place? We have to go deep, deep into New Mexico's biological, cultural, and religious history that takes us to medieval and ancient Spain, as well as Mexico. So we need to look at Spain first. We know that Spain had Sephardic Jews for about 1,000 years until 1492. That means that the Sephardic Jews came about in the Iberian Peninsula probably around 70 AD with the diaspora of the Hebrew people, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Romans. We know that this scattered the Jewish people throughout the Mediterranean world, both throughout Europe and North Africa. A branch of these folks ended up going north into Europe, becoming the Ashkenazi Jews. Another branch goes to Iberia, to what's today Spain and Portugal, and they establish the Sephardic Jews. Now, there were folks throughout the Mediterranean before the times of Christ. We know that the Greeks had become very Hellenized. They were heavily Greek, steeped in Greek culture and Greek society. It was like 70 years before the time of Christ that the significance of 70, there were 70 scholars who translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek because so many of the Jewish people were speaking and reading Greek and not Hebrew. So we already know that there's some cultural mixing and cultural changing taking place. So there may have been Jewish people in the Western Mediterranean world even before the times of Christ. We know that Rome, the city of Rome, has an ancient Jewish community that goes back way before the destruction of the temple. So these folks are moving around and establishing themselves over 2,000 years ago. Well, they're part of the Spanish tradition, part of the Spanish population and culture, well through Roman times, the Visigoths, And then the Muslims, the Moors, the Moros come to Spain in 711, and they are in Spain for about 700 years until 1492. Well, it's funny, if you read some Spanish histories, they'll say, well, the Moorish occupation, as if it was some brief, temporary period of Spanish history. Not true. Spain was thoroughly Islamic and took on the bloodlines and cultural attributes of the Moors and the Jews as well, although there was some separation in these communities. We know from DNA tests that there's North African and Sephardic Jewish DNA markers in modern Spaniards, Españoles. But in 1492, we need to look at this year because it's in this year that the Catholic kings, the Reyes Católicos, issue the Alhambra decree, the expulsion decree that ordered everyone, the Jews mainly, but also later on, shortly thereafter, the Moros, the Moors, to either convert to Catholicism or leave. It was a pretty brutal and, well, dogmatic thing to do. Let's remember the Jewish people had been expelled from what's now France and England a couple centuries before that. But this was Spain doing it. So roughly half of the population of Jews at that time in Spain left. To remain Sephardic Jewish, they went throughout the Mediterranean world. It was another diaspora in a way. They were scattered to places like Italy or Greece or North Africa, and also into places like France and the Low Countries, Belgium and Amsterdam, places like that. But these folks remained Sephardic Jewish. The other half decided to stay, that Spain was their home for generations. They had lived there and established themselves there. So these folks converted to Catholicism. Many of them converted genuinely, while others converted and understandably would practice outwardly. They would be Catholics, but they would go home and practice their Jewish customs and beliefs. These were the conversos, this generation. They were conversos. There was already an Inquisition in place since 1478, 1479. And you weren't brought before the Inquisition for being a converso. You were a convert, but you were suspect. You could be suspect of not being Catholic enough. This is why people with Sephardic Jewish names would take on names that sound very Catholic and very Spanish, surnames like Rodriguez or Martinez, and first names like Jose and Maria. Much like immigrants to the United States would have their last names changed if they were too difficult to pronounce in English, and the names would become Americanized, or it was just easier if you had a very American sounding name to assimilate. So a lot of these folks assimilated. This is 1492. So we have to consider that by 1525, a generation has passed. The children of these folks are not conversos. They are considered Catholics. And there are pockets of communities where in Spain and then later Portugal where these folks who are still secretly practicing their Jewish religion live together and practice in secret. You did not want to attract the attention of the Inquisition or civil authorities. Well, generally, though, these folks start to assimilate and blend in or even be absorbed by the greater Catholic population of Spain. So let's keep that in mind. The term that we read about and hear in the documents of Spain and later Mexico is Judaizante. These are the people who were crypto Jews. They were secretly practicing Judaism, which was against the law in Spain. Granted, it wasn't illegal before 1492 to be Jewish or Muslim, but after that you had to be Catholic. And so the term Judaizante is what gets passed down to us through the generations. So This is the 1500s in Spain. Spain is expanding throughout the world. Some of these folks are trying to get away from the Inquisition. They flee to Portugal. Portugal gets an Inquisition, so then they start to come to the Americas. And they end up in places like Mexico City and outlying areas of Nueva España, New Spain. I'll continue this story in the next episode of New Mexico History in 10 Minutes. Adios. Hasta luego. Goodbye.